Welcome to vanofaction.com, and if you are dreaming about having a van, whether it's for day use or week use or full time, whether you're going to be in a camp or boondocking, the one thing that all vans have in common is you've got to have a way to keep your food fresh.
Welcome to our van build series. This video will be important to anyone who wants to spend any time in a van because we're talking about how to keep your food safe for eating when you're on the road. It's really important. Hopefully we're going to save you some time, save you some money, and make life a little bit easier for you. So come on along, let's get started.
Keeping our food fresh is one of those things that everyone has to do, and it can sometimes seem almost automatic. I thought I'd given our food storage a lot of consideration, but I ran into some challenges. I want to share those with you. The first thing we had to do was figure out what kind of an appliance did we want to use. There's two basic styles. One is a chest cooler style, and the other is a traditional refrigerator style. Our research told us that because cold air is heavier than warm air, when you open a refrigerator door, all the cold air falls out onto the floor, and when you close it, you're trapping in warmer air that has to be cooled. Whereas with a traditional chest cooler style, when you open the lid, the heavy cold air stays in the cooler, and when you close it, it's already cold. So in theory, it takes a little less energy to operate a cooler than it does a refrigerator style appliance. The second consideration for us was freezer space. We're hoping, our dream is to spend a fair bit of time in remote places. So I don't want to have to run into town every 3 or 4 days for fresh food. So having lots of freezer capacity is important. And we couldn't find a refrigerator style appliance that had anything bigger than just a little weeny, teeny little weensy little freezer space. So the chest freezer or the chest style was a lot more practical. And third, because we hope to spend a fair bit of time on the road, having enough space is important too. We don't want something really little. We want something that's going to have enough to keep us on the road for a while. And so at the end of the day, we decided that a Dometic dual zone cooler was probably the best for us. Dometic is a great name. It takes very little energy to operate. And with the dual zones, you could have one side freezer, one side fridge, both sides freezer, both sides fridge. You control it all by any way you want to have it. And they come in a really big size. So we decided on the largest Dometic dual zone cooler they make. The next question was, where are we going to put it? And being a big chest, it seems pretty natural for it to be a bench or a step or something, but I didn't want to be sitting on it. I didn't want to move stuff to get into it. I didn't want to get on my hands and knees to get into it. I wanted it to be very convenient. In fact, in one of those expensive Winnebagos, they even make it so the fridge is easier accessed from the outside than the inside. I mean, who would think that was a good idea? Anyway, I wanted it to be very easy. In the galley, easy access. So this is what we ended up with.
What I would normally do is just build a plywood box to put the cooler in, build a gable inside the mullion from the door and then inside the wheel well and put the cooler in there. But unfortunately, that was not enough space for the cooler. What I ended up having to do was move the back gable towards the back of the van, but that meant making a cutout for the wheel well. Now, once I got those two gables in and put the drawer slides on, mount the cooler shelf, it would slide out 100% from underneath the cabinet out into the galley space, and that would be fine. But once it's out there, there's an awful lot of weight. That's about 120 pounds fully loaded, a lot of downward force on the front of that cooler. But more importantly, from a design perspective, a lot of upward pushing from the back. There's a real lever action there, and I wasn't comfortable with the back gables being attached well enough with the cutout for the wheel well. So what I decided to do instead was eliminate the back gable, and then I built two small plywood gables or a box underneath the shelf. And in doing that, I could attach the slides to those pieces, put the shelf on top, have the shelf again slide right out from underneath the counter, fully exposed, 100% out, and the front of those gables would not compress because of the solid plywood, and at the back side, I could use the tie-down clip that came with the van. Now this is the front clip. It's drilled through the floor, and on the back side there's a very heavy washer and a bolt that goes through and sandwiches the steel clip to the floor and to the side plywood gable there, which is just solid as a rock. It's great. You can see the two gables with a spacer at the back and there's a spacer at the front. And that space between the gables becomes a drawer under the cooler. And then there's a drawer under the kitchen sink as well. You'll see the second clip at the back. Now, this is in one of the van tie downs. If you take the tie down bolt out, you can take it to an automotive store and get a longer bolt with exactly the same thread. It just sits in there and ties everything down as if it was welded. It's just amazingly strong. So then the question became, how do I attach the cooler shelf to the gables? And initially I thought I would put a cleat attached to the underside of the shelf inside the gables, leaving exactly the right amount of space to allow for a regular roller bearing drawer slide, a heavy duty slide that you can buy at almost any hardware store, unless it's COVID, because then you can't find them anyplace. And I couldn't source those close by anywhere. So I eliminated the idea of a cleat, and it cost a little more money, but I went with what's called an undermount slide from Richelieu Hardware. It's rated for 170 pounds, 175 pounds. It's a kind of a slide that they put underneath filing cabinets. It's a heavy duty slide, excellent product. Probably a little overkill, but I'm happy with the installation. And actually, it was easier than doing it the other way. This was just mindless installation, worked really well.
This installation has worked really, really nice for us. It's just as easy as could be, and it's very convenient. But once we start driving, we have to make provisions to hold it still, because it could be 120 pounds. You got to make sure it's locked solid. And because the drawer slides are at the bottom of the cooler, that's where the mass has to be held still. And so I built a mechanical locking mechanism for when we're traveling. This is what it looks like. So when we're going down the road, there's no worries at all about this thing sliding open no matter what. It's safe. That's good. When we get to camp, the first thing I do is open this little cabinet, reach in, unlock it, and we're set to go. And that's wonderful. But we're not always parked perfectly flat. Sometimes we're on an angle. And with that much weight and this nice an installation, if you're on an angle, this guy's going to slide open. So I wanted to make a small, lighter mechanism for holding it closed, because reaching down here isn't convenient all the time. I made a little lock here. Now you might ask, why can't I just use this one all the time, Dave? And the reason is, this is at the top of the drawer. You're still going to have a lot of play. If you're going down the road, this thing's still going to move, it's going to wear. When you're traveling, you want it locked on the bottom. When you're camping, you want to be able to, you may want to have it locked on the top. If we're parked somewhere where we're flat, we don't use it at all. It's perfect. I want to take a minute right here and share with you the biggest problem I had getting this cooler to be where it is and so it looked right. And that is this. I did all my research, but it wasn't exactly the way I thought it was going to be when I got here. I knew it was going to be tight. This is the biggest model of cooler that Dometic makes. It's a dual zone, 97 liters, CMF something or other. Here's a picture of it. And it's 34.5 inches wide, which is a very wide space. And I wanted it tucked into the space between the front of the wheel well and the back of the big mullion by the sliding door. And this is a ProMaster 159. So that space between those two is about 35 inches. It's like there's not a lot of extra room between all the things I had to get in there and this cooler. It had to fit just exactly where it had to fit. That was fine. And the depth, according to the Dometic drawings, is 21.5 inches deep. Well, I made this cupboard 24 inches. I've got some stuff I need behind it. The cooler can't go right up against the wall because there's stuff that has to be back there. But I figured a couple of inches would give me enough room to play. And that was fine. In fact, I thought I'd have enough room for the cooler to be back inside the cupboard an inch or two, so that I could have this door go all the way up and match the height of all of them, so that you didn't even see the cooler when you came into the kitchen. It was just completely in the cupboard itself. But when I finally got the cooler and got it installed, it sat in the space just fine. But look what happens when you open it. Zoom in on this, Dave. Look. It grows because the cover moves back from the line. I thought it would have been pinned so that it stayed exactly the same. It grew. So fortunately I had a little bit of room to spare. And this just barely stays open. I've got it pulled out as far as it can possibly go. Everything's set up just optimally, and it just barely works. But in order to make it work that way, I had to pull the cooler itself forward to the front of the cupboard, which meant cutting this cupboard down so that I could have space here for the poles. Now, I think it looks fine the way it is, but it's not the way I designed it. I ended up having to do the cabinet door twice. I've had this cooler in and out probably a dozen times trying to get everything fitted properly because it was just that tight. And the drawings on the Dometic drawings didn't give you all the information. So my advice to you is just do all the research you can. Leave yourself a little bit of a cushion. In a perfect world, go and actually physically see the unit you want to buy before you get it. I wish I'd been able to do that, but we just didn't have access to that. One of the members of our community asked me how you wire in your fridge, and of course, that's going to depend on the fridge or the cooler that you buy. My particular unit uses both 12 volt and 120. So the first thing you do is figure out where on the unit your plugs need to be, the right side, left side, the back, wherever it's going to be, and then run the appropriate wires from the fuse block to plugs on that side, that location. Because my unit slides in and out, I have to be careful that the cord is long enough to still work when it's plugged, when it's fully extended, but also doesn't get tangled up in things when you put it back in. So I've got a clip to the side of the gable. And then I leave the 12 volt and the 120 wires plugged in all the time at the back. They're always in there. And at the cooler, when it's fully extended, I figure out which one I need at the time, and I make the plug in the appropriate plug, tuck the other one out of the way, and we're good to go. The hardest part of all this system is remembering to switch them when you leave camp and you have to be on 12 volts, or when you get to camp and you don't need your solar panels anymore. Took a fair bit of planning to get here, though, to make it work this way. And as you've seen, it wasn't perfect to begin with. And the ironic part of it is, this cooler assembly is almost as expensive as the roof rack and the roof clips were. But I think this is a good place to put the money. All in is less than $300, but still, getting this system the way it is, this way, with knowing that it's strong enough to hold the weight it's going to have, and secure enough that we can drive down the highway and not worry about it going anywhere, it's made life really good for us. Hopefully you found this useful. Hopefully I've saved you some time. And watch these other videos that are here. Give us a like, a share, and a subscribe, and come on back.